All right. So D2L is basically where you're going to get all of the tools and information that you'll be using for this course. It's also where you can check your grades, take quizzes, and go to turn in your assignments. So here you'll find the syllabus, a link to the playlist of course videos, and information about me, and then any news articles that I post here. Important pieces of information that I feel like the class needs to know. Here in the Content tab, you'll find your textbook, as well as any other materials like my PowerPoint slides, any code samples that I'm giving you, things like that you can find here. Discussion board will not be used extensively in this course. For the most part, it will be for introducing yourselves. Some of you have not yet done that. I recommend you do that as soon as possible. You can take quizzes here, turn in your assignments here, and then view your grades here. So really, there's not a whole lot to D2L for this particular course. So, since this is a course about programming, why don't we write our first program? For the C language, you typically, for a compiled language like C, you'll need two things. A way to write your source code and a way to compile it. And then you'll have an executable that you can run. So if you already have a way to compile C code, you can skip over this portion of the video, move on to the actual programming part. But if you don't, I recommend Cygwin. It's a way of getting some Linux functionality into Windows. It makes it pretty easy to compile your programs. So that's cygwin.com. Download the executable here. Then, pretty standard stuff there. Use system proxy settings. Any of these mirrors, basically just places to download it, will work. For the packages, you'll want to switch to full view here. There are a few things not included by default that we're going to want to have. So wget is one of them. You'll want to select the latest stable version. Then gcc-g++. Then the make command. And that should be good for now. If you ever need any more of them, you can always run this installer again to find any packages that you did not include the first time. So, finish installing that. This will take a bit of time to download. While we're doing that, you'll also need a way of actually writing your source code. A lot of people, especially as you get more and more experienced in programming, will have dedicated programming environments, as they're called, places to write and compile their code. Something like that isn't terribly necessary for this particular course, so I'm going to be using Notepad++. It's a pretty simple text editor. It's basically Notepad, but a little bit better, which is what the ++ means. That is a programming in-joke related to the incrementing of number values. Latest release. And this installation is significantly involved than the Cygwin one. Defaults should be fine here. All right, let's see. Oh, still going. Okay. And it is here that we'll be running, we'll be writing our code. So, while Cygwin finishes, the thing about running program files with Cygwin is that you will need to save your files in a place where Cygwin can see them. And we can't really do that until it's finished installing. So keep that in mind as we're writing this program. This pretty simple Hello World program. Hello World is typically the first program that you learn to write when you're writing in a new language. Basically, it's just a simple program that when you run it, it says Hello World. It prints that out to the screen. So to do that, We'll be borrowing some code from freshing.com. So include iostream. All of these extra symbols are ways of telling the compiler what exactly you'll be doing with that. So we'll go into much more detail about what each of these symbols and the structure of this program actually means. But for now, it's enough to just get a program running. Int main brackets. If you're familiar with a language like Python, you'll notice that there is much less emphasis being placed on the actual format. It's important to have a consistent format, but unlike in a language like Python, format isn't really taken into account with C. All that really counts is the single spaces in between these values here. All of this other white space is going to get compressed together, something kind of like that. So it is important to have a fairly consistent style so that your programs are easier to read, easier to debug, easier to fix, and easier to write. So I recommend getting used to a style now. Usually you will adapt your style to whatever your team is doing if you're working in a group with a larger project. But it's also important to have your own style. Yep, yeah, there it is. Now we can actually save this into our Cygwin folder eventually. Come on, there we go. So you'll find a new folder called Cygwin64 here. Go into there, go into Home, and this is where you'll be saving all of your programs. So for now, we'll call this temp.cpp. Temp is the name of the folder. .cpp simply tells the computer that this is a C++ file. C++ is a more recent version of C. It has all of the features of C, so for this particular program, it really won't cost us anything to write it in C++ as opposed to C. This would work whether you compiled it as a C program or a C++ program. Save it there. You'll notice that Notepad++ actually noticed that we have a code block here. I recognize that. It also highlighted certain words. These are reserved words. These have special meanings. So return is a word used by functions, and we'll be covering functions later on. It essentially means when the function ends, send back this value. And we'll get into more of what exactly that means later on. So now that we have, unfortunately, this recording software isn't the most stable, so I had to skip over actually opening this. This is the Cygwin terminal. You should be able to find it fairly easily. Just go to your files, find the Cygwin terminal. You could also type that into a search, like with this icon if you're using Windows 10. So here, I'll introduce you to a few commands for this. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is type cd, or change directory, space, period, period. In this file system, period represents the folder that you're currently in, and period, period represents the folder that the folder you're in is currently in. That will move up a folder. And now we're in the home folder. Another useful command is ls, list, and it'll show you the different information that you can find, all of the different files in your folder. You'll see that since we saved temp.cp in home, it's here. Now, since we've installed GCC, we can actually compile this. But first, we'll want to check and make sure that it's actually been installed. So the typical way to do that is to type in the name of the program, G++, and then -- version. This will show us the version we're using, and if it doesn't recognize that command, then that means that something went wrong. In order to compile this, we'll type gcc-std equals C++ 1y. You can see this command over here. And then the name of the file that we want to compile. And if we've done it correctly, Give it a second. You won't get any errors. If you've made some mistakes and the compiler notices that, it'll say error, and it'll point you to what that error actually was. As we get more and more complex programs written, I'll teach you some more efficient ways of debugging, but it's nice with compiled languages that you can find those compilation errors before you ever even run the program. So now that we've compiled it, you'll see we've got this a.exe here. This is the default file name. And in order to run that, you do /a.exe. Hello, generic Lambda. So, if you followed these steps, you've created your first C program. Congratulations. We'll be covering some of the basics of programming and the basics of C starting next week. You can expect video lectures for that to go up by the end of the day on Monday. You can find them in the course videos playlist, as I mentioned earlier. So I look forward to a productive semester with all of you. Please feel free to email me if you have any questions, and I will see you next week. Thank you.